Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to On the Other Side, Leadership After Transition. It's me, your host, Jeffrey Lodix. Nice to be here. Got to tell you, I'm really excited today because my wife found the roof rack on our van. We've had this van for 2 years. We traveled to Virginia last year, and we're going to get ready to go back to Virginia and New York City in a few months. And she found the roof rack, so now I have to buy the roof rack thing for stuff to go in. So I'm just excited to have to spend some money. But more importantly, I'm excited to have Dan Dwyer. I'm going to bring him on here in 1 minute, but I got to tell you, this has been a long time coming, hit and miss. Both of us have been just extremely busy doing different things, but we just haven't got an opportunity to connect. And well, today we get to connect, and I'm so excited because, well, he's someone that I've found a lot of interest in over the past year and in a few months. I've got to see him doing some great things, and I'm just really, really excited to bring him on to have him provide just great content for you guys to listen to. And more importantly, after this show, look him up because he's doing great things. Anyway, without further ado, Dan, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hey, Jeffrey, I'm great. Thanks for having me. You're absolutely right. Long time coming, but time well spent, I'm sure.
No doubt, no doubt. So I tell everybody all the time, I'm here in Tampa. I do most of the shows from here unless I'm traveling for some odd reason, but I like to stay kind of planted. Now, where are you coming from today?
Today, Huntsville, Alabama.
Huntsville, Alabama. We were talking about earlier. So when I first met you, you were in Colorado. I know that when I first met you and face to face, it was in Orlando during the Military Influencer Conference. And at that point in time, you were kind of debating about maybe going to Orlando, or you were doing some type of soul searching or some type. There are things happening in your life that were leading you to certain places. But Alabama is where it called. What is in Alabama that called you to Alabama?
Yeah. So interesting enough. I like to tell people that Huntsville is probably the intellectual capital of Alabama. It's located in northern Alabama, just south of Nashville, great city. Birmingham is just to the south, great city. Huntsville is on track of being the largest city in Alabama in the next decade. Nowhere else will you find a greater sampling of engineers. Hence, it's the Rocket City, which is notably of interest, given that this year is an anniversary for the Apollo trip to the moon. The funny thing is Werner von Braun, who introduced that rocket to General Eisenhower, chose Huntsville in the hills of northern Alabama largely because it reminded him of Germany. Okay. I jokingly drive over one of these hills every day, and people's to go home and around, and they say you drive over the mountain. But of course, I moved from Colorado Springs, and the house I sold there, I had an unobstructed view of Pikes Peak in my backyard. So we like it here. I'm in a season in life where I can really live anywhere I want to live.
Right.
But I chose Huntsville largely because it's geographical convenient to family in central Indiana, where I grew up, family in the Destin, Fort Walton Beach, Pensacola area. And then our oldest son is a ranger down in 1st Ranger Battalion in Savannah, Georgia. So 5 to 6 hours each way. I-65 corridor goes straight through. As people get older, I'm essentially giving them a place to stay in our large home overnight to kind of cut that travel. So it's a win-win for everybody. But I've been here since November, December timeframe, built a new house, and really enjoy it. So.
Outstanding. Well, good. So you talked about Indiana and things of that nature. So let's talk about that. So entering the military. So you grew up in Indiana. Is that where it was that you grew up, or you grew up in Colorado? I mean, you said Indiana, right?
Yep, absolutely. Grew up in central Indiana. Interesting story. We all have our own story. They're uniquely ours, but my twin brother, who's a Navy captain today, commands a schoolhouse up at Great Lakes. Both of us joined the military out of high school, largely because we were raised by our aunt and uncle after our adopted mother passed away. So adopted at birth. At the age of 4, our adopted mother passed away. We were in and out of foster homes, and the aunt or the sister of my adopted father chose us to take us in at a time where they were empty nesters. Their 3 kids were out of the house. So essentially they didn't owe us anything. And we realized that as young men early on. So at the age of 18, like all twins being compared and contrasted, I went the Army route. He went the Navy route. We both got commissions through different sources. I spent 4 years in the Army, knocked out 2 years of school, went to college for 2 years, got commissioned through ROTC, and re-entered the Army that I loved. Dave took a different route. The Navy has a LDO program, so he made chief at 9 years. The next year he got picked up with LDO, and it's rare that an LDO makes captain in the Navy, but he's still doing well. In fact, after 34, 35 years, you're going to have to kick him out of the Navy. So.
Outstanding. That is a great story. Good. For me, I was down here. I had the great pleasure, obviously, of being in a lot of joint organizations. So the understanding of the Navy, system, if you will, that is pretty impressive, because it is very difficult to go to be a captain after going through all that. But that's good for him, and interesting story. I'd love to hear a little bit more about it at some other time, because I think that a lot of the things that make us who we are happen at a very young age, and the things that you've been through, it shows a little bit of resilience, right? And it shows kind of what you went through in order to come out on the other side as kind of the person you are, which is really impressive, because you hear the opposite of that in a lot of stories. My wife works in the foster program, foster area in the social services, so I hear a little bit about the stories that aren't so positive, and it's great. It's great. Great news story for you. So you join the Army as an enlisted guy. You get out after 4 years to go and to do an ROTC program. You come back in commissioned. You were commissioned into what branch? You were an infantry guy or where were you?
Armor and cavalry. So okay. When I initially enlisted as a young 18-year-old, I wanted to, delayed entry program. Obviously, I was interested in the college fund, right? Have a means to go to school. That was always the end game from an academic standpoint. But I wanted to take an MOS, military occupation specialty, that I knew would stretch my mind a little bit. So I was actually a crypt analyst. I was a code breaker.
Okay.
Military intelligence. Back then, a lot of the codes were analog, not so much digital. But at 18, I understand the value of stretching the brain, as well as securing that security clearance. While in uniform, to use that as a benchmark or possible launching pad later. I knew from my military intelligence experience and the way their career field is structured, it's inverted pyramid, that if I wanted to actually lead soldiers, I would have to go into combat arms. So when I commissioned, I went into armor and cavalry.
Outstanding. And how long did you stay in the military as a commissioned officer?
So I have a total of 22 years as a commissioned officer. My plan was to always transition at the 20-year mark.
Okay.
But I stayed for 22 years because there was, of course, a war going on, and still is a war going on as we fight our nation's longest war. And I wanted to serve my last 2 years with then Colonel, now Lieutenant General, retired H.R. McMaster, who was President Trump's former national security advisor. Now he's running the Hoover Institution out in Palo Alto, California, at Stanford University. I absolutely believe it's leaders, Jeffrey, that keep people in uniform, and it's also leaders that get people out of uniform too, right? So.
Wow. It's really interesting. While you were saying you believed it was leaders that kept people in uniform, I instantly went to say, yeah, it's leaders that force people out too. I mean, it's just it's the good and the bad, right? And that's really an interesting. I've truly never heard that before, which is, I spent 20 years in the Army, and I probably should know that, but I never heard it said like that.
Well, throughout your military career, you had points where you had decision points, right?
Oh yeah.
And typically, if you were in an organization that you absolutely loved being in, you enjoyed the culture, which is the personality of the organization, the climate, the command climate, the mood of the organization, and the leadership, you probably signed up to stay longer. Yep. The opposite is true too. I always define success in the military as not the rank or position I attained, but leaving with what I came in with, right? And so the decision was critical at a time where I was spending years at a time away from my wife. We're still fighting our nation's longest war. 02, 03, we weren't short-sighted, but we had no historical precedence that we were going to be still fighting this war. So, and I had two impressionable young men who are now serving in our Army today in their own right. So that decision to transition was pretty easy. Like most, I wasn't sure what I would do after transitioning, but I knew that I wanted to continue to shape lives and contribute to teams, organizations, groups, warfighters. So with the two pillars of that clarity and competence, I remain confident to do whatever I wanted to do, and I have.
It's awesome. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about the idea to transition. So it came up to, you said 20, but you stayed 22 and there, because there was things happening, right? So, but when it came time, when you actually knew that you were going to be, how far out did you know that you were going to walk? Actually, this was going to be the date. Was it 24 months out, 36 months, or was it within a year that you actually knew that, hey, I'm going to end it on this day?
Yeah. So obviously, like I said, the first target was 20 years, and then I readjusted that target to the right. So yeah. I knew a good 12 to 18 months out.
Okay.
That 12 of those months were deployed, right? So
yep.
You're busy, you're doing the great work for the country, but it also gives you some time for independent thought and to strategically think how you're going to transition and what's next in your next season in life, right? How do you move forward?
No doubt. So with that time that you had and you started to think about it, obviously you had your sons, your wife, there was things, your family you were thinking about, but what were you thinking about as far as the job? A lot of people don't, I mean, they talk about the three things, right? They talk about your location, where you're going to live, what are you going to do, and how, and the job that you're going to do, right? So job, location, and money. Those are the three things that people get concerned with. What did you kind of focus on? Like, do you know what you're going to do at that time as far as a job is concerned? Do you really care about just staying in a location?
Yeah, so I certainly knew that my passion in life were going to be focused on developing leaders and managers and teams outside of the military and in the corporate sectors. I also knew that unless you have a very unique job in the military, the business acumen is not going to be there. So and then I took advantage of the times, right? 06, 07 timeframe. There were some economic challenges. So I uniquely looked at organizations that I knew that were stripping their traditional organic leadership, management development, team building capabilities with the idea of offering that service. In return, I learned business acumen, financial management, human capital management, which was probably my strongest suit anyway, coming out of the military, because that's what we do as leaders, and technology management. So I sought and found purpose, individuality, and fulfillment through four outlets. One was, the continued investment into our two sons. I believe that our true legacy in life is not our job or our vacation, but our children. Second, less than 2 weeks after retiring in December 2006, I found myself in Washington, D.C., working as a military strategist for the American Enterprise Institute, where I was able to work with an amazing team that developed the surge plan that was briefed to President Bush, the 43rd President of the United States, and subsequently planned, prepared, and executed under the leadership of General Petraeus. I've had the pleasure of working as a strategist for other products that have affected our national interests because of that opportunity. I've since then, because largely for ideological reasons, I've worked as a capability developer as well, shaping requirements for platform and command post celestial mission command systems that today give the warfighter unprecedented situational awareness on the battlefield, motivated for ideological reasons. I've always wanted to make sure that the capabilities that we provide the warfighter is exactly what they need versus what someone wearing a pocket protector thinks he or she needs, right?
Right.
And then lastly, I find purpose and fulfillment every day in my coaching of leaders, individuals, and teams. My coaching in both public and private organizations is specifically for individuals and organizations who are absolutely committed to dramatically transforming the way they lead and the way their organizations perform and business results. And I've largely been successful in doing so.
Outstanding. So if I was to say, what do you do now? That is what you're doing now, right? And that's pretty much so tell me about, so you have a business, and your business is Vet to Biz Life. I mean, there's other things. I mean, I listened to your podcast. It's like been a transformation of sorts. So I kind of want to hear how that all started. How did Vet to Biz Life start, when, and kind of what has been the idea of it, which I believe you just kind of shared with us. And by the way, if I had some money in my pocket, I'd say, Dan, listen, I need to hire you right now, because you're. I mean, it's very, what you just said was impactful. I mean, even to me, I'm listening to you, and I yes, I want to make those changes. Yes, I want to be that guy, and I could hear it. You know, I could hear it and the confidence that you're exuding while speaking. But you know what you're talking about. So kind of talk to me about Vet to Biz Life.
Yeah, so Vet to Biz Life is exactly that. It's dedicated to the boots to business advancement of veteran entrepreneurs. You know, it's a niched audience that I'm very passionate about. You know, in the case of that audience, I want to reverse the trend of 7 to 9 out of 10 startups failing, depending on whose statistics you read about. Right. But it's an audience I certainly understand, and because I have alternate sources of income, I don't take advantage of them. You know. People who've worked with Dan Dwyer, who are veterans, absolutely know and would tell you that. I think it doesn't all have to be discovery learning. And like I alluded to earlier, unless you have a very unique job in the military, that business acumen's not going to be there. And depending on your departing point in the military, those leadership skills may not have been developed to the point where you absolutely have them to lead a business or an organization. So in my coaching, I spent a lot of time not just on the basics of business acumen and running a business, but also leading a business.
Right. And I think it's interesting as I think the military influencer conference last year was my first time there, right? So this year I'll attend. I know this is the third year, and it put me in a place to find many veterans and kind of like you alluded to, exit point. What younger guys that got out, or gals, older guys and gals, senior guys and gals, junior guys, and just the conversation, right? It's really interesting as you have a whole bunch of folks that are leaving, and leadership is often talked about. It's talked about from every level. I served in the military, so therefore I'm a leader, and I believe that. Don't get me wrong. I believe that everybody's taught from the moment they enter leadership by their, the senior folks around, or whatever the case may be, or schools that they've attended. But it's really interesting how much leadership coaching there is. But I've heard, and you are one of those folks that actually get a lot of credit around the veteran community, which I love, by the way. And that's actually why I sought you out. I remember seeing a video when you got to Orlando at 5 o'clock in the morning. You were at the gym. I was on my way to work, and you were at the gym in the hotel. And I said, I'm going to go see this guy as soon as I get there. And I actually did get a chance to meet you. So what do you think about that? And I that's kind of like, it's not really that's an opinion question, but I mean, as far as all the leadership coaching that's going around nowadays from the veteran community, what are your thoughts on kind of that, if you would?
Yeah, so I can't speak for all the leadership coaching that's going around in the veteran community. I will tell you that the reason why our military is so good, compared to other militaries across the world, is because of leadership. And I'm a true believer that, and it's the age-old question: is leadership learned or is it innate? And Dan Dwyer believes that it's both. And we talked earlier about leadership is what keeps you in uniform, but leadership is also what causes us to lose quality service members every day. And I really believe that the best way to learn leadership is to observe leaders in their natural habitat, identify those things that you absolutely want to use later, copy, or emulate, versus those things you certainly don't want to do. We can learn from bad leaders too, right?
No doubt.
And what we learn best as leaders is how to onboard people, how to develop them, how to value them, how to foster a culture of recognition. Because no matter what organization you are leading, those things are important in order to retain quality team members, but also to be successful businessmen. Now, I also believe today, because I've had to change with the generational changes, right?
Yes.
You work there at Tampa, so you work in a multi-generational workplace. So there's young adults workers that want to be valued and challenged, and there's older workers that want to be valued and challenged. And I'm a firm believer that that's important. That absolutely is important. But if you remember when you were sitting there reading orders in the military, you learned task and purpose. We had essential tasks, we had specified tasks, we had implied tasks that weren't written. Hence they were implied. But early on, I figured out that as leaders of any organization, you have to reverse that narrative, and you have to start with purpose. You mentioned that Simon Sinek came and General Thomas had him come and talk to you guys. He's well documented in terms of your why, but
Right.
but it's much more than that. I think why or purpose has to be permissible in the workplace, because what I found that and this was my greatest frustration in the military. If somebody failed a task, the default was, well, just retrain them.
Mm-hmm.
But often the skills, knowledge, and abilities were there.
Right.
The performance shortfall was in the leader.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, dummy, you didn't articulate the mission well. You didn't articulate your vision. You didn't articulate the expectations. Mm-hmm. So even today, I believe that feedback only comes in two forms. It's either positive or constructive. And constructive is what we find ourselves as leaders in making a difference, and that is restating the expectation, providing an example of what right looks like, because everybody learns differently. We're visual learners, we're kinesthetic or tactile, we learn auditorily or a mixture, and then simply empower them. And leaders that do that are generally successful.
Right. I got to tell you, and as you said that the different styles of learning, when I was a drill sergeant, I thought I was innovative. I thought I learned that. I never had read that before, that there were different styles, but I thought I found it. And so I went to my commander and I was like, "Hey, sir, check this out. I found out that," and he was like, "Yeah, there's a book, you can read it." And I was like, "Gosh." Anyway, but it was really interesting because that actually opened up my eyes to why I was not a great leader and why I needed to develop, because I thought that they needed to do what I said because I said it, and they needed to figure out because they were either superstars, they were all right, or they were rocks, right? Well, the rocks became to be fewer and far between once I learned how to speak and articulate what it was that I wanted them to do, right? Purpose, direction, motivation. That's something about leadership in the Army. Anyhow, that's good stuff. So I would ask you this. So you've done a lot of great things. I mean, as far as from the time you transitioned, the understanding that you didn't have the business acumen, you have a purpose, you're going through these things, these changes. Well, as people are getting out of the military and are looking out to what are they going to do, what would your advice be to them as they're getting? I mean, what is something that you would go back to and say, this is what has helped me become successful as I exited the military, and I go back and tell them this is what it would be? What would that be, Dan?
Well, it starts with mindset, right? A lot of veterans, and I'm not generalizing, I hear it firsthand, complain about the lack of structure, routine, and accountability out of uniform, right? So I tell them, you've absolutely got to find your own traction and rhythm. Mm-hmm. I don't need an organization like the Army to provide me structure, routine, and accountability.
Right.
I learned from my time in the military that I can do this personally through personal habits and removing any dependencies of others. And admittedly, I'm better at structure, routine, and accountability because of my military service. Mm-hmm. But I never looked for another organization to replace what the Army provided while out of uniform. Off camera before we started talking, as you transition into that season in life as a retiree or a civilian, Stephen Covey said it best, start with the end in mind. It may seem to be far-fetching, but if you identify specific goals with measurables and make them time-bound and backward plan, because we learned backward planning in the military, whether it was an offensive operation and planning from the objective to the starting point, or in defensive operation, from the time that you expected the enemy to attack to the time the reconnaissance went out to the obstacle emplacement, the holes are dug. If you break it down into bite-sized, manageable pieces, it doesn't seem so insurmountable. Now, Now, what I tell veteran entrepreneurs often is, you got away with operational security, if you will, by not coming home and talking about what you're doing, with your family. Successful entrepreneurs absolutely have to share with their family in terms of what they're doing.
Right.
We don't get it. Why are you all spending all this time on social media? Why are you, why are you at home but you're not at home? Because you're building a business.
Mm-hmm.
But family members and friends can be your best advocates and supporters, but you've got to enable them to do that by sharing them what this new life is, right? So
it's beautifully said. It really is interesting that it's something in which I never spent time on a computer. Before I got out of the military, I wasn't a social media guy. I wasn't too much of obviously a business guy. I spent a lot of time at work, but when I was home, I'm home, right? That I'm making sure that all the time that's here is for my family. Well, now that I've got out, I'm spending more time here because of the fact that I share with my wife and my kids. They know what I'm doing, and they actually try to help on a lot of occasions where they want to be part of it, which is great for me because it makes it exciting. It's not just a Jeff only show. Everybody else is involved, and it makes it very, very much easier, right? So I don't have to constantly explain myself, and I know that there's people that are struggling with that. So great point. That actually, you saying it made it register in my mind. Let me ask you this. So we have obviously the Army, any branch of service doesn't make you a leader. It kind of refines some of the things. I don't believe you're born leaders. I think there's skills that you develop, be people you're around. I think that that's one of the things that happen throughout life, no matter which way you go. But I would ask you, what qualities gained and or honed in on during your military time has made you successful at doing what you're doing right now?
Yeah. So core values is what influence how we view the world and how we interact with others. And it's key that we understand our own core values. Like, the Army has its set of values, like everything. They use an acronym, leadership, to lay out the values of loyalty, duty, responsibility, selfless service, honor, integrity, personal courage. But I absolutely believe that I entered the military with core values that have governed me. And that's what makes leadership fun, if you will, because you remember when you were in uniform, when you were that drill sergeant, you had new recruits come to you and they came straight from the couch and they didn't have any values. Mm-hmm. Their first idea of values was introduced to them by whatever was painted on the walls, whatever was painted on the steps going up, that they had to probably scrub and mop and sweep. But my 5 core values have always been authenticity, being genuine, confidence, in the right way, integrity, loyalty, fire, right? Others are, leading with meaning, right? Investing my time and talent into things and people that personally inspire me in the world, and doing it in a very sustainable way. Sustainability, putting my efforts into things that will provide lasting positive change in the world. And you do that in the military. Your very best leaders were once followers, great followers. And we grew them to be the leaders of today and tomorrow. Vision, of course, is probably one of my strong suits. It separates me from others. Creating the future by building things twice, once with vision and once with reality.
Yep.
And empowerment, giving others the confidence to learn, grow, and contribute to the world in sustainable ways. I led in a very decentralized way, and it was effective because I probably introduced collaborative leadership in uniform long before others have. In fact, in the last 3 years, I've had the privilege of developing the Secretary of the Air Force's staff. Go figure, a former Army guy, but one of the subjects I covered was collaborative leadership. And it's different because when you think of any military service, you think of traditional hierarchical structure, right?
Yep.
Today, going back to what I was saying about the multi-generational workforce, you absolutely have to lead in a very collaborative way in order to retain quality team members. So those are some of the things that I think come to mind as it relates to your question.
That's awesome. And while you're talking, leadership is like very it's like an art, right? And I'm listening to you talk about the things that you kind of have, the qualities you have, and the ones you've brushed up on you. And any I just say it's very artistic. I mean, when you think about how it works and the things that you have to do, you have to. It's got to be fluid. It can't be one way. You got multi-generations. You can't lead the same way to everybody. I mean, you're the same person from a values perspective, but different things motivate people. So it's really interesting just to hear you talk about it, and it's almost as if it's a beautiful painting as you're describing it. I'm listening to it, thinking to myself, yeah, there is something to it. It's really great. So I thank you for sharing that with us. Now, I'm going to ask you to share a story, right? So my favorite part, don't get me wrong, I really enjoy all the information that comes, the content that comes, and the opinions that come out, and the information that you flow. But at the end, I'm a humor guy, right? So I like that you can't make that stuff up story. The things that if you told, I don't want you to incriminate yourself either. So don't do it like don't plead the fifth on anything. But if there's something that's just funny, something that you've seen throughout your time in the military that you just couldn't tell someone that never served a day in the military, and they wouldn't believe if you told them. I'd like to hear one of those type of stories if you have one.
I do. Of course, for anybody who's been in the Middle East, right? Iraq, Afghanistan, their culture involves, well, let me back up. My first time in Iraq was 03 to 04, right? It was a time where many of the people of power fled, so there was either traditional or religious clerics or self-imposed clerics, and if you were out on the Iraqi-Syrian border, there was have and have-nots,
right,
when it came to what was going on in the green zone in Iraq versus what I call reality out on the borders, and it was military uniformed leaders like myself that were engaging the civilian leaders, either appointed or otherwise. And part of that conversation was, and I always tell people, this was not winning hearts and minds. This was probably, winning friends and influencing people, right? Which is a great book. And part of that means that you have to exercise patience to get to your desired end state, whatever it is. Training and advising Iraqi security forces, developing your army, meeting with clerics, leaders, whatever the case, providing security, which is a precondition for political and economic progress. Mm-hmm. And that often involved what we affectionately called goat grabs, right? Right? So we had to sit down, we had to drink the chai. As soon as they figured out I was a cavalryman and I liked cigars, it was a good day because anytime I showed up, Saddam's cigar stash kept getting smaller and smaller, and I don't have a problem with that. Mm-hmm. Normally, I'm not about taking gifts from anybody, but in that case, and have the conversation, right?
Right.
And probably the funniest story that I can remember is one of our other leaders involved in this process also was out for a long time, and we realized that he had to go through this go grab experience and cook it and eat and converse and move things forward as it relates to our relationships with the Iraqi leaders. And one night he came back, and a couple of his soldiers, stuck a goat for about 24 hours into his chew. White trailer, right? And for those who don't know, ultimately, and the longer you were in country, the more capacity we've got in terms of resources. So he was not a happy guy. When it was dark at night, All he had was a flashlight, and he opened up that door and he heard noises. And as soon as he flashed that flashlight, there was this goat staring right at him, and he chewed up a lot of stuff and crapped all over his floor and everything. So that was probably one of the funniest, wartime stories. There wasn't a lot of humor. We were pretty much serious. You really learn a lot about yourself when you're going to bed at 1 or 2 in the morning, waking up at 5 and getting up and starting it all over again. And that gets to good leadership too, right? You have to absolutely understand what your capacity is as it relates to making sound and right decisions. But
it's the most stressful situations, right?
Right. The enemy doesn't sleep. So.
No. I find that humor for me was one of those things that, it's just one of those things that keep everybody just the nervousness down. I think everybody's nervous. I think that's one thing that exists, no matter how can you adapt during that time frame. And it's not about hysterical laughing, but it's about levity, right? Just kind of breaking up the monotony of craziness being constant. Anyhow, hey, Dan, before we go, what I do want to do is ask you, hey, is there any, where can people reach you if they wanted to get in touch with you, if they wanted to see more about you? Where are those places that they can look at?
Yeah, so vet2bizlife.com is my website. Dan at vet2bizlife is my email address. Dan at vet2bizlife.com. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. I'm really active in LinkedIn. 30,000 organic connections or so. I've cultivated a lot of business on LinkedIn. If I have some advice for transitioning soldiers and veterans, build a solid LinkedIn presence. LinkedIn came about in 2003. Obviously, I spent 2003 to 06 in Iraq, so LinkedIn was the least of my concerns, but it's a powerful tool to connect with people while telling them what you want to do next. And that's what veterans don't do a real good job at is, we're not good at self-adulation. We're not good at self-promotion. We're not good at telling people who want to take care of us what we want to do next. And believe it or not, when you do that, positive things start happening, because if these leaders are anything like me, I always want to take care of those who took care of me, right? So majority of today's service members are not on LinkedIn. They think of it as a transition tool, but it's much more than that. Long gone are the days where people can submit a digital resume and expect a lot of action.
Right.
I'm interested in Jeffrey Lodick. I'm going to go on LinkedIn. I'm going to look at his first connections. I'm going to talk to his first connections. I'm going to have those conversations before I even talk to Jeffrey. So it's no longer who you know, but who knows you. And,
that's right.
And I can't overstate that as part of your transition mission.
It's a great piece of advice. That's actually where I do majority of my work as well, LinkedIn, and that's one of the biggest. That's the foot stomper to me, is that the LinkedIn has to be at the top of your mind on your way out. And it's not just on your way out, like you said. Building a network is something that is done over time, right? So why wait until I'm about to get out? You should start doing that stuff now, so you get, no matter when it is, so you can keep that fresh. I have a rule. A lot of people don't realize that I do, but I have a rule on LinkedIn. If I connect with you on LinkedIn, we have 1 month, 30 days to have a 15-minute conversation. That's the thing. I want my network specifically to have. I need it to have production. I have to benefit you. You have to benefit me. I know that it would be pretty hard to do 30,000. So my number isn't that high, and I don't expect it to go that high at this point. But really, it is. I need to have that productive, connective network. So I make that 30 or 15-minute conversation, and it's nice. And people that are on there, I think it's 2,025 or something like that. But I've had 2,025 15-minute conversations, and
well, I think that's the right approach.
It's interesting. I mean, you really get to know. I mean, the one thing I can't stand, Dan, to be honest with you, is we connect, and then 5 seconds later, you're trying to sell me on something that I've no use for whatsoever. So it's one of those things that's, oh, okay, you started out this conversation with how you doing, and then the next conversation is, let me sell you printers for your your 65 network computer. I don't have that. So anyhow, it's just interesting how that all works. But anyway, Dan, listen, I really want to tell you thank you. I want to thank you for multiple things. One, for providing us great content for everybody to listen to. Two, for all the things that you do. I just like to follow you on LinkedIn, on Facebook. I like to see you. You're very positive. I look at the messages that you leave to other people that are just trying to get by and to get their businesses started. You're a source of positive outlook on everything, which is great. I enjoy reading your comments. So I do that often. The third thing is taking your time with me to come out here and just spend time with me. I mean, you don't have to, and I know that that's not something in which you have to do, but the fact that you did, thank you from the bottom of my heart, because you've helped not only me, but the people that listen to me and follow me to just kind of open their eyes a little bit and just let them enjoy your world. So thank you very much for taking your time with me today.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I just want to say one comment. I was reading through your live comments. I want to address something that Darren Hayward said. Jeff, this is another great topic. However, in the last 5 years, I feel that the leadership in the Air Force, and I can only speak for the Air Force, has diminished, and I find this very disappointing. I really think a byproduct of fighting our nation's longest war since 2002, Afghanistan 2003, is many of our leaders have never been developed in a way where they understand the concepts of coaching and mentoring.
Right.
Coaching is task-based, mentoring is relationship-based. Some of my mentors today were leaders that I worked for in the past. And I really think, there's been a natural progression, right? I mean, in 2002, 2003, our second lieutenants are now lieutenant colonels, and one-stars. Our privates are senior non-commissioned officers. And if they didn't develop in the right environment because we were too busy fighting a war, then that's what causes Darren Hayward and others to make comments like that. It's unfortunate. I think there's nothing more important than slowing down, taking a tactical pause in military parlance, and investing in people. And the way I did that, I was a leadership who led by I was always a leader who led by my feet, not by my seat, and going around and having conversations. And lastly, the silver bullet, of course, is caring. And hopefully Darren will find or be that leader who cares for others. So
it's outstanding. That's good. It's interesting because I have my screen kind of split, and that was off, and I didn't even see those comments as we were going. To be honest with you, I didn't see Kirby's comment about LinkedIn is not a transition tool. Obviously, great words of advice for you, Dan and Chris. Always Chris being the supporter of folks. I love Chris Hoffman does great things for us. I watch his show often. I also spend a lot of time, and that's where I see you posting a lot of your informational stuff. Dan is in Chris's group, which is the Vet Tribe. I mean, it's just nice. It's ambitious vets. I mean, the guy's constantly doing great work. So good to see him on here. But again, thanks, Dan, for coming. Is there anything else you want to say before I let you roll out?
No. Thank you for the opportunity. Only the very best wishes to you and your family, your health through the remainder of 2019. Let's have another conversation sometime between Thanksgiving and New Year's, and let's lay out a good strategic plan for success for Jeffrey Lodick in 2020. Make it the best year ever.
Sounds great, Dan. Thank you again so much. I truly do appreciate you, and we will talk again soon. Anyhow, for the rest of y'all out there, thank you so much for coming out. I appreciate you taking your time to listen to us talk. I really do. I appreciate you guys spending your time with me. It's always great to see the comments and keep bringing them out. I apologize for not addressing them when I didn't see them, because I messed up the layout because I'm not a technical genius, but I'm getting there. I'm working on it every day. Anyhow, ladies and gentlemen, I'll see you next time on the other side.